Special meeting of the Town Council, April 18th, 2023. Will the clerk call the roll, please?
Councilor Greathouse.
Present.
Councilor Steer.
Here.
Councilor Burlingame is absent. Councilor Arnold.
Here.
Councilor Worthy.
Here. Would everybody please stand and pledge allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Public hearing, A, proposed budget for fiscal year 2023-24, discussion interaction. The public hearing was advertised in the Valley Breeze Observer on 3/30 and 4/13/23. I declare the public hearing open. This hearing is to review and discuss the proposed budget. First, we'll have a review of the budget under item 1. Questions can be asked under item 2. Council can then discuss the budget or proposed changes under item 3. The review of the proposed budget, as needed, our finance director will present the highlights of the budget of the town and the local schools. Hi, Adam.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Good evening, council. Happy to thank you for the introduction, President Worthy, and happy to take everyone through a high-level review of the proposed fiscal 24 budget. And then, as you mentioned, we can get any questions and get as granular as you'd like. You can follow along here on the PowerPoint. We'll start off with a review of expenses. Look at the debt service quickly. We'll review education. Yes, please. Thank you, Christine. Thank you. And then we'll review capital requests. Yes, please. So off the top, with respect to the municipal side of the budget, with personnel, salary, and benefits, there's a 4% increase for admin exempt employees earning under $90,000 a year. And for those earning in excess of that, 3% inflationary increase. I want to call out here, there's a separate aside increase in the budget for our chief of police. Health and dental increases for next year with the Rhode Island Interlocal Trust are at 1.1% and 6.9% respectively, and those are actual accurate figures. We've received confirmation on those rates from the Interlocal Trust, not estimates. With respect to municipal government expenses, again, high-level review and financial administration, there's an increase there in the tax assessor's office budget. In fiscal 23, we removed, we could afford to do it, wasn't ideal, but it was part of the changes that had to be made. We removed a $35,000 set aside that goes into the revaluation reserve. But it's important to get back to doing that so that we maintain the set aside account, so that when it's time to have a revaluation, we have some money set aside and we're not trying to manage that expense all in 1 year. So working that back into the budget here. Some savings and credit to our tax collector for finding them. I guess you look for silver linings wherever you can. With respect to the motor vehicle phase out that the state implemented last year, accelerating it a year early. There's less bills to be sent out as a result, so we found some savings there, and also less collection fees. So we were able to find savings in both of those areas in that department. With respect to DPW, Department of Public Works, we've got an increase in some purchase services, tree maintenance. This is not necessarily more of that activity happening, it's really just the cost or the expense of when we do have to call for that service has increased. And also increasing salt and sand for that, excuse me, that should say 24, that's my error. But anyway, the current, or the winter season that we've just come out of, the salt and sand was funded by council-approved American Rescue Plan funds. And we know that those funds are temporary and not going to be here forever, but we know that we should plan for winters are going to continue. So trying to work, again, that back into the general funded budget, because it's something that's going to happen, and the option that was available to the town last year is not going to continue going forward. We've got an increase in required soil testing and license renewal for our transfer station, and then an increase in fuel and and consumables. Consumables are small parts, tires, things like that. Diesel, the cost of diesel is up. The cost of gasoline it's come down, but it's still comparatively to where these budgetary levels were. They've increased, so we're trying to account for that here, and then also an increase in tipping fees at the Johnston landfill. With respect to public safety, I mentioned that earlier here. I mentioned it earlier. I'll mention it again here. A separate increase that was reviewed and approved by the budget board for the chief of police. Increase in education and training. These are required trainings that need to be conducted by our police department for accreditation purposes and also per state law. Increase in special patrol. This is a line where if there's a particular accident that happens in town and it requires more investigation, this line funds that. I'm loath to use this as an example, but if there is a shooting nationally and we have a increased response at our elementary schools or our high schools, we would account for that here. And we've seen an increase in special patrol, so we're trying to build that into the budget for fiscal '24. And also an increase in service contracts, and what's driving that chiefly is our TASER program. We're at this is the last year of a 5-year agreement, and like anything else, when there's a bit of a teaser rate to get you in, and we're seeing a substantial increase in order to continue to stay into that program. To make any changes to it, we wouldn't have the $1 million, an excess of $1 million insurance policy that comes along with maintaining the contract with the vendor. Continuing in public safety, excuse me, EMA, we have a slight increase for CPR hazmat training for our EMA CERT team that the EMA director plans to do in the coming year. Animal control, similar to the trees service in DPW, here again, increase in veterinary expense driving that other purchase services line. But again, it's not the frequency of calls, it's the cost of when we do call has increased. And then over to recreation, there's an increase in part-time wages for swim, tennis, arts and crafts programming, minimum wage increases driving this year chiefly. IT office increased in hosted server expense, Microsoft 365 applications, cybersecurity audit and compliance. Those last two are key in a whole bunch of ways for the town, specifically related to the budget with respect to our property and liability insurance through the Rhode Island Interlocal Trust. This sort of thing has become a huge focus for them over the last 2 years, to where their members are starting to see that they may not even be able to be insured because of certain complications within their network environment. Thankfully, and credit to our IT director and the rest of the team, we're not in that position. But it's important to maintain that stature so we don't see any increased cost or compromise our ability to be insured in the future. Senior center, increase there for heating oil and propane, and then a slight increase in purchase services. This line is where pest control, waste disposal, cleaning are budgeted. And then in other operational expenses, we have some increases in property liability insurance, again through the Rhode Island Interlocal Trust. A slight increase in telephone and fax. I think this was adjusted too low in fiscal '23, so we're trying to get a more honest number there, and an increase in postage. With respect to aid requests, there's a slight increase to the Manton Library, but Harmony Library was able to come in level funded at FY23's levels. An increase to the Gloucester Light Infantry, the Little League, and historic cemeteries. Next, slightly out of order here with my notes, but it's okay. Debt service. I want to highlight this here because this is unique for the town. I think you could count on one hand the amount of towns that would fall into this category, but within 4 years, paying down the debt here for the senior center bond and the bond that was taken out to for the Glocester schools, 4-year roof, town will be debt free. So that's great. That's a very healthy financial outlook with respect to debt service, and it gives perhaps some freedom within the budget in out years. I just wanted to highlight that quickly. Now, with respect to education, Gloucester schools, There's a 3% increase for the certified teachers and 3.5% increase for non-certified staff, and that's per the agreed to collective bargaining agreements. Health insurance through the Rhode Island Interlocal Trust, 4.6 increase, and dental a 2.2% decrease. So some favorable numbers there with respect to dental. And again, those are accurate numbers in terms of we've received our renewal information from the trust. In terms of the local appropriation, it's a 2.5% increase over FY23. Again, pardon my lack of update there. With respect to the regional budget, you can see the breakdown there, 3% in general ops, 2% increase in capital, and a 3.2% decrease in debt service. However, what that means to the Glocester is we're taking the hit this year in terms of the proration. So that's a 2.5% increase there to the town. And that budget was approved, Madam Clerk, help me, when was that? March 13th? Yeah, so that was approved up at the Region Financial Town Meeting. Quick review of capital with respect to what's been approved. We have some I say approved from the budget board. Couches for the senior center, either new couches or recovering of existing couches. It turned out to be around the same amount that would be needed. So if they choose to recover or buy new couches, the $6,000 would do it. And some storage shed for senior center. A lot of things that are inside taking up space that they've acquired through the years that are useful at certain times, but not all the time. Decorations, things like that are important. Looking for a home for those. One frontline police vehicle, 2 were requested. Budget board moved that down to 1 frontline police vehicle. And then with respect in DPW, automatic standby generator for the area over on Chestnut Hill Road. That's the area that supports the rest of the town, and the other buildings in town have standby generators. And so the DPW director brought forward requests to the budget board, and the budget board agreed, I think unanimously, that that should be a priority. Also, 3 trucks of different size and purpose. As you can see that detailed on the capital page. And then $400,000 in paving from an $850,000 request. Fortunately, it's for municipalities in Rhode Island. It seems likely, given some news lately, that they'll be in the governor's, hopefully in the governor's approved budget, but it seems likely that it'll be included. About 300, just over 350,000. Was it 384? 385. That's been coming out. So we'll be able to leverage that in addition to whatever's approved here and slight carry forward from the approved amount in fiscal 23 into the paving season that we're in now, thankfully. Welcome spring. I can pause there. That's, again, a very high level pass. There are copies of the budget here, but I'm happy to set that up for the council. And thank you to those joining us this evening. And I can answer any questions.
All right, public discussion. Anyone wishing to speak or ask questions, please come on up, state your name for the record when called to the podium. Anybody want to come up with some questions?
Walter Steer, 1318 Putter Pike. I've got a couple questions. One is on special appropriations. This special appropriations, I think, I know on page 34 there's some, but also at the beginning, I don't know if it's the first page or second page, there's special appropriations.
Page 2.
Now, are these going to go before the public for a vote?
Yeah, I've already prepared the questions that, once this goes through, I'll go over with the finance director. I have 4 questions so far. 3 of them are from the restricted accounts, right? Other side.
2 should be from the restricted account, 1 for the proration.
Yep.
And 1 for the from the set aside for Gloucester
For
schools.
Gloucester, yeah.
I have the capital, I have the proration, and I have the future ops of Gloucester schools.
Correct.
So these are all, is this gonna be paid for by the taxpayers, or is this coming out of the surplus?
In the question, we put the existing surplus.
Okay, so this won't affect the tax rate at all?
Correct.
And there's other special appropriations showing in the budget, but those, I believe, are from assigned accounts.
Yes.
So we can transfer those without a vote, correct?
And, yeah, we all know we're getting hit from the region this year. And the last 2 years, we were on the plus side by quite a bit. We saved a lot of money. But unfortunately, the town didn't put any of that money aside for future operations. It doesn't look like here in '22 or '23 we put any money for the region anyway. We did put some local money, I think. Was that voted on?
Yes, yes, sir. Last election.
But there was
I'm
no,
sorry, in 22, not 23, excuse me, 22.
and on the Gloucester school side, is there still two accounts, or is there only one now? There used to be one for future operations and one for loss of state aid.
There's one account,
It's just a loss of state aid.
but loss of state aid and future operations.
They're in the
It's
same-
highlighted, and they're in the same account.
Because we've been using those accounts. We haven't lost state aid in a couple of years, I don't think. We've increased in state aid.
Correct.
So, we first started that loss of state aid when they had changed the funding formula, right? And most of the schools out here in the rural area lost a lot of money. There was, so much was taken away from us, it was spread over 10 years instead of having it just hit it all at once. And so now that 10 years is up, I'm wondering why we still have a loss of state aid. I know every year we have to use part of our surplus to balance the budget. So I know eventually that'll run out, and I don't know if this is to help make that last longer or not, but we haven't lost state aid in a couple of years, but I think we've used that account, correct? So I'm wondering why, maybe we should change the name of that account or something, so. But, and we should put, instead of having the voters vote on it every year, I don't know if there's a way we could put like $150,000 into the budget, and once that gets approved once, every year you'll have $150,000. I think that would be a better way to go with, because the taxpayers do, I think they rejected for the regional money last year, didn't they, first round?
22,
22?
yes.
So, a lot of times they don't understand what that's about, and unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't get approved. So if we could somehow put that into a, if it gets into the budget, once it gets into the budget, then it's there every year. Is that possible to do that, Adam?
This year, it's extremely tight.
No, I don't, I don't need this year,
In the
but.
future, certainly, I think is it a great idea? Yes, I think 2 thumbs up,
Yeah.
sure. I just wanted to note, I'm sorry, I'll get you the mic.
Yeah.
Pardon me, I don't mean to take your time.
No.
But on page 122 of the audit, just to note that, and for the council, the particular set aside is for aid reduction, GPS standing for Gloucester Public Schools, and future operations. So, Mr. Steer makes a great point. If that's something we need to change in terms of, or designate that more specifically, we can do that. I just wanted to share what's there now.
Adam, when was that changed into one account?
I don't know. You
Because
had
ever
me on
since,
that was
I can
concerned.
remember, there were two accounts.
Yeah. It's been, one account since I've been here, and
Oh,
it's not
okay.
that long, but, no, at least 3 years, to be honest.
What page is it?
122. Fourth column from the right.
And the next thing is, it seems like the biggest problem in this budget is loss of revenue. Especially, you know, for the local schools. What, did you get a final number on that?
Which number?
On aid to schools, the local schools?
I have, it's not, excuse me, hang on, I have to get in the mic. The number that's there is, from state aid, with respect to state aid, is $25,000 less than what's in the governor's budget. I originally had it $100,000 less.
Yeah.
The concern being that early on in the budgetary process from the state, there was a lot of chatter, and we received guidance from the League of Cities and Towns and other groups, interested groups, saying you copy and paste that number from the governor's budget and put it in yours at your own peril. So I was trying to account for that and build that in. But we're further on into the budget season. There's still that $25,000 of cushion there. Felt better about that.
Yeah.
But again, there's still, and the talk was changing the funding formula to include English as a second language and other language learners, factor them, weight them more heavy into the state funding formula, which, for all intents and purposes, would have drawn resources from districts like ours and sent them elsewhere. So that was,
Well, that's
doesn't seem
coming
like
down
it's,
the road, I think.
perhaps,
Hopefully
in
not
other
this
years,
year.
hopefully not this year, but it seems likely that that's not going to happen. But again, early on in the budget process, there was a lot of that sort of talk, so.
How much extra state aid did we get this year compared to last year?
Compared to last year, about 100,000?
So it's not a lot more.
No.
The problem with state aid, and Adam's right about not maybe using all of it, is they can give it to you and they can take it away next year. We ought to talk to our legislators, and there should be a maintenance of effort on state aid. Once they give it to you, they can't give you any less, because they make us do it in our budgets. So they should, that way you could count on, once you got the money, you don't have to worry the following year. Because a couple of years ago, Smithfield lost a lot of, they got a lot one year, and then the next year, they lost an awful lot of it. So it would just make, you know, it would make it, the playing ground even. You know, I know the state probably wouldn't like it, but,
Should I, just something that Mr. Steele said. You're right, I'm a little confused by what you said. That column seems to have combined those two accounts,
Right.
right? It says aid reduction for Gloucester schools and for future ops. Yet in '21, we voted separately 100,000 for a loss of state aid, and then we voted for 100,000.
right, I thought it was not too long ago we did it that
Seems
way.
like that's a little
Somewhere
not right.
in the last year or so, it got combined. And I
just don't wanna hit twice.
no. So now it's all in one. And what is our fund balance now? I mean, yeah, I guess you call it a surplus. We have to have 12%.
6,401.
What percentage is that?
19 of the proposed FY '24, not
That's what we have going into this year?
correct.
That's an awful lot, you know. I think it was last year or the year before, we spent an awful lot, but somehow we replenish that through extra revenue during the year or deposit their whole budgets and they give back. I know there's a lot of that. And that's actually money that the taxpayers have to pay for, which the town didn't need. And this seems to happen almost every year. So I don't know how you solve that problem. Every year is different, I know, but it seems every year there's money given back to the town. And we have, you can look at the audit, and there's a lot of extra revenue every year that we didn't predict we were gonna get. And we get. You can look at it, it's a lot of money. So, I know we look at the budget that we've been spending in the past, and, you know, the audited amounts and the actual amounts, but somehow there's a lot of money left over. And the last thing is factory mutual. This is the second year now that the taxpayers have to make up whatever it is, $700,000 a year. So it's almost $1.5 million in 2 years that the taxpayers have to pay in taxes, which we probably shouldn't have had to pay. So hopefully that'll be straightened out by the next time around, but for 2 years we paid a lot of extra money that we didn't have to pay. That's all I have.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to come up? Get you, Dave.
Hi, my name is Kim O'Donnell, 54 Cordy Drive. I would just like to applaud the council and finance on the budget. I find it to be a rather lean budget compared to other cities and towns. So done a little bit of my homework. However, I did want to say that I'm happy that I live here. I feel safe. My kid has a good education, and I feel like the money is well spent. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Come on up, Dave.
Dave Steer. I've got a couple of comments on the school budget, if we could go there first. And most of it's on the revenue side, the questions. And it was touched upon by Walt and Adam. But if you look under the proposed 24 budget, you've got state aid of $2,700,000. Now, the governor's budget calls for $2,746,000, so there's a $44,600 difference there, which you don't want to use it all. I don't understand why you wouldn't use what's in the governor's budget. We do it on other counts, and I'll point that out as we go through. So that will have an effect on the maintenance of effort on the bottom line. So if it's in the governor's budget, you got to have faith that it's going to be there. Next is the $400,000 that's coming out of the set aside, and I agree with the comments that used to be 2. The previous finance director at some point in time created into 1, and that's how it's been, and that's how it's been used. It's been used for future operations and not for reduction of state aid, but it got used for the schools. So we're planning on using $400,000. We used $181,000. What do we have for a balance in that account?
835, I believe.
835.
No, we're using 181 in this year. We're planning on using 400,000. So what would that leave us from the 855 or 833? So you're going to be down to about 250, okay? 250,000 after you use this year's and propose next year. Does that make sense, Adam?
254, yeah.
So then we move down And the big reduction is the fund balance for the schools. This current year, you plan on using $390,000. Next year, you're not using a penny. So my question is, what is the fund balance for the schools, the unassigned? Well, in the school's case, it's the restricted fund balance.
It's just under 40K.
Just under 40,000. All right, so you see, the school budget's being carried with surplus and with the assigned money for operations. It sounds like the schools have come to the end of their fund balance, restricted fund balance. And the town has only got $254,000 left to make that up. So I think you can see there's a problem coming down the road on the school side with operations, and I didn't even get into the operating end of it, because most of the increases is in wages and benefits. And as you go down through, it looks like your total reimbursements is $3,508,793, and if you add the 44,600 in there, it comes $3,553,000. So your maintenance of effort is, with this budget, $7,340,507. If you take away the 44,000, your maintenance of effort goes down to $7,295,000. So it does affect the budget. Okay, on the town side, I'm not going to get into the operating expenses at all. And as soon as I say that, I'm going to make one suggestion, and that's on your salaries for the non-union folks. Adam indicated 3% and 4%. Using a percentage is probably the unfairest way of giving a raise to someone. It's great for the high wage people, high salary people, because they're going to get, 4% is going to be a lot more to them than it is to your lower wage folks. There's probably a fairer way of doing that. And as an example, if you take the public works director and his current salary times 4%, he's going to get a raise of almost $3,600. Now, if you take that same 4% and apply it to the deputy town clerk, he's not going to get anywhere near that. It's going to be like $2,500. So it'd be fairer if you determined a number and applied that to everybody. So everybody would get a number. Question then comes, how do you determine that number? All right? So you could take the, we use the same example, the public works director, and take 4% of his salary, and everybody would get a $3,596 raise. Gets expensive. Okay? I wouldn't suggest that method. The method I would use is I would take the total wages for the non-union, divide it by, if my math is, if I can count right, is 16 non-union. Divide that out, it comes to like 63, 64,000. Apply 4% to that. Now you're talking $2,500, $2,600 raise, and you could give that to all your employees. And my personal opinion is that's fairer than just a percentage to everybody. For what it's worth. Page 1 of the budget. I'm just wondering what, and it says adjusted 23 budget. I'm wondering what that means.
That's, so in terms of adjustment, we set aside, I think it was 109,000, and we have not spread that from a budgetary perspective to the respective departments in 23 for the union negotiations. So that title, I actually, I thought that's it approved, I'm sorry. There was something that was intended to happen and it has not happened yet.
On the first page, Al.
No, I follow you. It's a title that carries through. It says adjusted 23.
Right, carries through the whole budget.
Right.
But-
It's because that's just a function in Excel. You can have these
Right,
titles.
but- I guess my point is, you know, the council adopted a budget on October 6th. The referendum was October 25th. That budget passed. That adjusted budget is not that budget that passed. Can you do that?
Plug in the numbers.
No, what I'm saying is, the adjusted fiscal year 23 budget that's here
Mm-hmm.
is not the budget that the voters passed.
I've spent more time with the 24 budget. I thought that was correct. I'll have to take that back. I don't have a quick answer for you. I'm sorry.
Well, most of the adjustments, if you turn to page 3, most of the adjustments are on the revenue side, municipal department revenues. Here, on the adjusted budget, it shows $1 million, I'll say $1 million, okay? It was, the approved budget was 567,000 municipal revenues. That's a big change. And it's a change I'm not sure that should have happened. And there were 2 other changes. If you look down further on the interest on delinquent taxes, that increased from 90,000 to 100,000, and interest on investments increased by 9,100. So what did this do? And why do we put that extra revenue in there? And I'm not even sure if it's reasonable revenue that we put in there. So what did it do to your budget?
Inflates the revenue. I understand the point.
Well, what it did, if you go to page 4, the amount to raise by taxes was substantially reduced. Reduced by 453,000. So the budget that was approved by the voters is a higher number. So your levy's wrong. But the levy's not wrong, because if you go to the state website, you'll find the 24,000, well, it's 130, I think, on the state website. That's the levy they've got, but it's not the levy that we approved. So what do you do?
Dave, what line item was that, again, on page 4?
Amount to be raised by taxes, middle of the page.
Oh, thank you.
So I don't know where that goes.
Right.
But it does affect your 24 budget, because you're starting 453,540.
567.
You're starting behind the ball. So it does affect your budget. On your proposed 24, on the front page, you're increasing expenses $727,000, 9% increase. It's a large increase. And most of that, I won't say most of it, A lot of that increase is from the cuts that were made in fiscal year '23. They weren't actual cuts. They were postponed cuts. Because you're taking the money you cut last year and you're putting it back in the budget this year, for the most part. So you actually cut $400,000, a little over that, and you're putting it back in this year. And that's why your expenses are going up to 9%. All right, so the cuts were just postponed for a year. Now you got them back. On page 2, the very bottom, total expenditures, $32,557,766. That's an incorrect number. You add up your expenses from the front page and the back and the second page, you're going to find out it's $32,657,766. You're $100,000 off. Now I'll tell you where that 100,000 is. On page 1. Down the bottom, Worcester, Glocester region. You got $100,000 there, proration. And what someone did was they netted that out. That's not what you do on page 1. Page 1 and page 2 are your operating expenses. That $100,000 will go on page 4 as an adjustment. On page 3, under the Glocester schools, middle of the page, total revenue, you got $3,158,793. Go back to the Glocester school budget, and whether you use the extra $44,000 in there or not, you're going to find that the Glocester school total revenue is $3,508,793. So you're off by $350,000. Going on down to interest on delinquent taxes. We're budgeting $100,000. I think that's very, very over-optimistic. I got the information from the tax collector, and just to give you an example, in fiscal year, and I'll go back 2 fiscal years, fiscal year 21, and this is just for real estate, you collected basically $84,000. Fiscal year 22, you collected $75,000. Fiscal year 23 through 3 quarters, you collected $35,000. You can see the trend. And you're not collecting any interest on motor vehicles and such. So I think that's an optimistic number, and it should be adjusted. Page 4. And before I get into the adjustments, what is our fund balance as of 6/30/22? $6,401,000.
Yes, sir.
You got an audit there? Could you look on page 13? of the page. What's it have for a balance?
6,479,000.
Right, this is, get two different numbers in the audit. All right, you're $78,000, $78,068 off. So, depending on which is right, and I don't know which is right, but I do know where the 78,000 is. In your school budget. And I'm just going to give you a little history on the fund balance. And I want to go back 3 fiscal years. Fiscal year 20, the increase in the fund balance was 610,000 and change. But you used 670,000 in your budget. Fiscal year 21, the fund balance increased by 355,000, but you used 825. Fiscal year 22, the fund balance increased by 274,000, but you used 807. So you can see the trend in the fund balance. The amount of increase is decreasing. Does that make sense to you? So you need to be careful. And the way I do the math, if this budget's approved the way it is, your fund balance is going to be $4,965,000, which is 15%. You're required to have $3,009,000, so you've got $1,040,000 or $46,000 that you got for above and beyond the 12%. Not a lot. Not a lot. Now your adjustments. You're planning on using a little over $1 million from surplus. You sure you want to do that? I'm on page 4. $400,000 you can take out real quick. You're labeling it, and I don't know what the consequences are if it's not labeled correctly and it gets approved. But it should not be transfer from surplus for GSD future operations. It should be transfer from assigned funds. Then you got 570,000 you're going to use of surplus to balance your budget. I know last year when that was mentioned, you didn't want to hear about it. So you're going to actually use 570 this year?
I don't think so. Mr. Steele, if I could interject, Council President.
Yeah.
I had some recommendations for the council on how we can ameliorate that. We haven't gotten there this evening, but it involves changes in police department with respect to new recruit, things like that.
Well, I think if you go back, Adam, and plug in, if my numbers are correct, if you plug in the correct school revenue and some of those other things, you're going to find that you have to use that 570. Okay, and if you've got other plans, that's great. But the budget we're looking at right now has the 570 in there. So anybody looking at it, whether it's online or wherever, when are they going to see that budget in order to be able to vote on it? Should have been here tonight. Otherwise, you don't know when. How are the people going to know? That's all I got.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to come up?
guess there's a question for Robert Shields, 33 Douglas Hook. Am I able to go ahead and make questions based on my budget as the recreation director, or is this time only isolated for comment by citizens of the town?
Well, it's gonna be part of the budget proposal, you're asking something, so I don't see why we can't.
So do now then.
I would say no.
Okay. All right. I have a couple of things that I'd like to go ahead and review tonight. I'm going to give a couple of different handouts to you. I will start with like the easiest stuff and then potentially ramp up to things that are a little bit more difficult. So initially what I'm going to provide you with is a proposed amendment to the 2023 salary for the summer employees. Some of this is based on knowledge that was gained after the budget process, and other pieces of this is in reference to requests by the council. So the largest sheet underneath happens to be the total salary for this upcoming summer. On the right-hand side, you will notice that there is a line item that says for year ending 22. That actually is the current budget for the salary for our part-time employees that was adopted by the budget board, that 56,422. Unfortunately, I do not believe that that particular number at this time is going to be able to support us through the summer. There's a couple of different rationale behind that. Number one, and the most important thing, is that in contacting lifeguards from previous summers that have now worked for the town for the past 2 years, they have indicated that they are considering going to other places to lifeguard. Currently, Smithfield is offering $18 an hour to their lifeguards, and Camp Russell is offering lifeguards $20 an hour at this particular time. In order to keep up with the Joneses, I'm suggesting a potential increase to the lifeguard pay rate to that $18 an hour to go ahead and match Smithfield. I know that we've been very fortunate the past few years that we've had an adequate lifeguarding staff, and I know that other towns have really been struggling to keep on a significant number of individuals to provide safety to the town beaches. So I really am fearful that if we aren't able to go ahead and match local communities, we do have the possibility of losing lifeguards, which would then obviously jeopardize our ability to provide lifeguards to the town beaches at an appropriate number of hours. So what I did was I took the lifeguard hours, I upped that up to $18 an hour, and if we were to go ahead and make that adjustment, it would be an additional $3,584 to the budget. One of the other items that was requested of me was to look into potentially addressing the litter problem that we have here in town, to try and go ahead and mitigate some of those messy streets that we've been seeing more and more frequently. I'm suggesting adding additional 2 individuals that could potentially compose the litter crew. Taking those 2 new individuals along with our current Parks and Ground employees for 2 days a week would be something that we could use to start the fight, I guess you could say, against our litter issue. This is not necessarily a huge expenditure. As you see, we're looking at requesting 2 new employees at $13 an hour, 6 hours per week for 6 weeks, which happens to be our recreation season. That would be an addition of $936. And then the final item that was requested but was never placed into the budget was the potential addition of 2 snack shack employees. I know that we have all noticed that the utilization, both positive and negative, up at GMP has increased exponentially, and I think it would be a nice potential summer job for the youth of Gloucester, and also a nice way to provide, I guess you could say, an additional reason to be up at that park that is definitely seeing an uptick in usage. It would just be a nice way to have kind of some options there, so that way people wouldn't necessarily have to go back into the village. And that's not necessarily another huge expenditure, but it is. something. So that would be an additional 2 employees, $13 an hour, 10 hours per week. We'd be focusing primarily on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday for those particular individuals. And that would be an additional $1,560 added to the budget. If you were to go ahead and accept all 3 of those items, you'll notice right there at the bottom, it would be a total of $6,080 added to my salary line item. Where I feel as though the litter crew and the snack shack would be a nice beneficial addition to our recreational employees. I don't necessarily feel as those are essential to having a successful summer. I do, however, feel as though the lifeguard pay rate is something that definitely has to have some sort of consideration. The last thing we want to do is put ourselves shorthanded, and the past couple of summers since I have certified, or since I have received certification as a lifeguard again, I have been filling in quite a bit, so I think it would be extremely difficult to go ahead and run the summer without trying to be competitive with others. So those are kind of easy things to go ahead and be considered. The less easy things happen to come from the actual recreation budget. So I was operating on a budget sheet that was printed off on 3/24, 2023. It appears to look a little bit different than the current budget that's sitting in front of you that was printed on 3/30, 2023. So I'm just going to go ahead and give you a sheet of paper so that way we're all operating on kind of the same idea, so that way you can understand what I'm trying to reference. So when we are looking at this particular form, you're going to notice that the FY24 requested budget is the numbers that I asked for this upcoming summer season for recreation. Right next to it where it says the budget board adjustments, you'll notice that there happens to be 3 numbers that were taken away. That's $5,000 from my recreational materials and equipment, $3,000 taken away from the Recreation Commission ski trip, and then an additional $1,500 taken away from a potential paddleboard purchase for the town beaches. After receiving this particular budget, I sent an email to the finance director trying to have some sort of rationale or inquiry about what exactly was the reason for these particular cuts, but unfortunately I did not receive that information. The budget board director, Chrissy, was able to go ahead and provide me with some additional information, but not necessarily a complete picture of why these particular cuts were made. I think the ones that really stand out to me that are significant and potentially would affect our ability to have a full recreation season happens to be the additional $5,000 taken away from the materials and the equipment, as well as the $3,000 that's taken away from the ski trip. I know that I was back here presenting to you not too long ago, requesting additional funds for the Recreation Commission so that they could hold their annual trip utilizing the ARPA funds. Unfortunately, that was not successful, but the council did step up with the contingency plan and did assist with this particular trip. I would ask that this particular number is potentially reinstated back into my budget. It's something that the Recreation Commission happens to take pride in, and they've been doing a really nice job of organizing it and running it and providing the youth of Glocester an opportunity to go ahead and do something that maybe they normally wouldn't be able to do. I think additionally, after our recent charter revision to the duties of the Recreation Commission, it gives them something to go ahead and look forward to and plan on a regular basis. If this number was to be removed from the budget, it basically hamstrings them in their ability to go ahead and provide this particular trip and to do anything like this in the future. I know that I wouldn't be able to go ahead and swing that particular number out of my budget as it stands. Things are getting a little bit tighter as we kind of move into this, I guess you could say, inflation era. So that's just something that I really couldn't cover myself. The other piece that I just didn't understand and I didn't necessarily get a complete feedback on was why there was a removal of additional $5,000 from my materials and equipment. So this particular number is something that typically does go by the end of the year, and it's kind of essential, especially this year when considering that we have to go ahead and purchase some new AED systems. And also, I'm in an every 2-year cycle of having to purchase our arts and crafts materials, which means every 2 years, I've got to go ahead and load up on arts and crafts for the beaches. That number is typically somewhere between $3,000 and $4,000 to go ahead and cover a 2-year stretch. So with this particular number being decreased to basically half, it's going to be very difficult for me to provide the programs that we have been providing over the past few years. Another item that was a little bit concerning did happen to reflect the purchase of those paddle boards down there for $1,500. Christy was really nice about responding and providing information about this particular item. And in her email, she indicated that the reason why this was cut was due to the unknown future of Spring Grove, which was discussed with the land trust head due to the high fecal matter levels. I understand wanting to go ahead and cut some sort of water device if we do have concerns about the safety of the water, but to that extent, why wouldn't we just cut swimming and lifeguarding and lessons over there completely? It just doesn't seem to necessarily make sense to cut one particular item that would cost funds and not necessarily just close the entire beach. So I'm kind of having a little bit of difficulty understanding how it is that the land trust is able to go ahead and provide information that maybe doesn't necessarily take a full picture of what's going on over there. Additionally, when we look at Spring Grove, in my 7 years' time as rec director, we have not seen any closing of Spring Grove during that time period. It's Marion Irons, which is the more concerning beach when it does come to fecal matter, and I think that we all kind of have a sneaky suspicion of why it is that that water is not necessarily as clean as Spring Grove has been. Additionally, the Department of Health does test the water, along with locally we test the water every 2 weeks, and so we haven't had any problems there, so I'm not quite understanding that particular rationale with regards to the cut. So when you look at the total cuts that were taken out of my budget, the $5,000 from the materials, the $3,000 for the ski trip, and the $1,500 for the paddleboard purchase, that's $9,500, which represents about 30% of my budget being removed. I know it might sound a little bit greedy, especially following Dave Steer and his analysis. But when we're talking about a cut of 30% to a budget, I don't think that we necessarily saw that number affecting any other department. So it's a little bit of a difficult pill to swallow, if you will. The last couple of items that I'd like to go ahead and bring up happens to be the capital request that was provided by Recreation. I know that we did a tremendous job up at GMP. We've provided some great improvements to that, and I was hoping to go ahead and continue with those improvements this particular summer, but those particular items were not accepted in this year's capital improvements, which happens to be on page 35. Again, Chrissy was able to provide me some good information about this, and they indicated that the snack shack workers, as well as the bike trail, was cut because they had a conversation with the Public Works department head, which I totally respect and understand his opinion. It just would have been nice to go ahead and kind of be involved in that conversation after the fact, so that way I could have an understanding of why it was that those particular items were cut or potentially not looked at something that could be utilized or improved upon in the future. And this kind of developed over this particular week. Even though we may not necessarily be putting money into GMP and looking at the bike trail or re-siding the building up there, I do feel as though the IT request for that town-wide security and security cameras may be something that requires a little bit of extra consideration moving forward. We have had some issues up there, and it would be nice to be able to not necessarily rely upon those closed circuit cameras that we currently have up at the park. Maybe something that has a little bit more instant access will be able to deter some of those behaviors that we're seeing up there. And then the last piece happens to be something that deals with aid, and that is Pontiac Basketball Association. I received a text message from PBA indicating that they did not have an opportunity to go ahead and present to the budget board requesting their funds for their annual basketball league, if you will. This is something that I had emailed the budget. I had sent emails to government officials about this particular item, inviting them to come. I mentioned this during my budget board time in person, and it's just a little bit disconcerting that I'm still receiving messages from PBA now looking for money from me to go ahead and provide to their particular league. As you know, during this particular year, I came requesting funds through ARPA to go ahead and assist them, and I don't necessarily feel as though always trying to bail them out at the last particular moment is necessarily the right course of action to take. I think that the overall idea that I kind of saw with my whole budget process was that the line of communications weren't necessarily as clear as they probably could have been. And while I don't necessarily want to throw anyone under the bus, because I totally understand that everyone has a lot of things going on in their lives, it is a difficult pill to swallow when you are receiving, let's just say, less than nice messages from entities in the town indicating that they need something from you or that you require something of you. If you need any additional information or details from what I've kind of gathered, feel free to go ahead and ask any other questions, but otherwise, thank you so much for allowing me to present. I really do appreciate it.
One quick question. What was the PBA looking for?
So the PBA is looking to go ahead and receive that $2,000 for each particular league that they were previously receiving. 2 years ago, during the budget process, it was suggested by myself through email correspondence as well as through in-person verbal conversations that PBA should be approaching the council or the budget committee to ask for requests the same way that GLL was. Previously, it was a situation where they had a line item underneath recreation. It just didn't seem to make any sense that one particular league would be receiving monies directly from the recreation program where others were not. So the question then becomes, why isn't BGYSA coming up and requesting funds from the recreation? So that's, I think, where this whole kind of item started to spiral out of control, and I don't think that it's necessarily been scooped up and put onto the right path. And I think that's kind of why we need to be a little bit more proactive at this point in reaching out to them to make certain that they can get on that straight line and follow through on things. Once it becomes habit, then they're good to go, but maybe guiding them at this point would be a good idea.
We were very clear with them in the way that how they run that whole thing, that they really needed to get an idea of how to run something. We pulled them out. I think we were very gracious with the money that we gave them to get them started. We also gave them some pretty good ARPA funds. But again, you know, they have to be able to run their show. You know,
And
they
I totally understand that, and I totally agree with you. I think it's just making certain that they are aware of the process. I think that's the concerning thing for me. What they do with their particular league, I'm totally on board with exactly what you're saying.
Right.
I just don't want us as a town entity to ever be looked at and pointed at and said, well, you're the ones that caused this.
Right.
I think that the big thing that, you know, I've always tried to operate under on is protect the town, and that includes our reputation. And
Right.
so if we do have to go ahead and maybe contact some people, you know, just personally, I think it's sometimes like an okay thing for us to do. But you are like 100% correct with regards to your assessment of that particular league and what's going on with them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Excuse me, Bob, one question.
Yes.
What's the current rate that we're paying the lifeguards?
So the lifeguards right now are at $15 an hour. So it's like I said, if you're looking at that particular form that I provided you, it seems like a big jump, but in the grand scheme of things, to go ahead and assure that we have that coverage, it's something that I think we may have to go ahead and consider, or at least try and get in that ballpark to be competitive with local communities.
That's the world right now. I mean,
Mhm.
you see it with the police department, you see it with municipal jobs.
Mhm.
People are going where the money is, which you can't blame them.
Yeah.
Especially everything costs more now,
Mhm.
so.
Yeah, and that's the thing that's worrisome, because you do have young individuals, and they're gonna see a number like 18 and a number like 15, and
Well,
you know.
if I'm them,
Exactly, I'd be jumping ship as well. Thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Bob. Anybody else?
Okay. Again, my questions aren't as high level as Dave's were. I'll have to figure out what to do with those tomorrow. I just had a couple of questions. I spent a lot of time with the audit this year, and I just wanted to know going forward, I know there's some people in this room that may know the answer to this, and if somebody can provide it to me, that would be great. But we have a lot of restricted accounts. The senior center, I know that's from donations, 4th of July Parade Committee, there's a lot of them. But how do you know what you can do with that money? If you don't know, you don't know. And to me, that money could sit there forever. So if there was some way, I don't suspect that could be included in the audit, but maybe there's some sort of report we could get so we know if we could use these funds. The other question I had, even with the parade committee, we're giving them another 20,000. It's great, love the parade. We gave them some opera money, but they also have one of those large restricted accounts. So I would love if somebody could give me, hopefully the finance director or his office, a balance, a total balance of everything the parade committee does have. Another question I had was under social services. We increased Little League by $5,000. I love Little League. We also gave them opera funds. That's a pretty big jump for social aid. I just would like to know what it's for. If they came to the budget board with a presentation, if somebody could share it with me. I don't need it right now, but I would love to know what it's for. The one that concerns me a little bit is the historic cemeteries. They do unbelievably great work for us, but they're getting a $9,000 increase, which brings them up to $15,000. I just wonder, when we get these groups, these volunteer groups, and we start handing them all this money, is there an accounting of what they're using this money for? We have plenty of equipment at DPW. I don't know if we're using it for outside help to get these cemeteries cleaned, and I just don't want this particular group to get much bigger before we turn it into a town department, which is probably where it's headed. The other question I had was with salaries. I just wanted to know, I don't know if I'm privy to this information, perhaps Adam could let me know tomorrow. I would just like to know if the budget board approved or was behind these 8% increases in salary for non-union police employees, or if that came from the finance office. It just seems a little high. Most of us department heads don't go to the budget board and ask for increases at all, so I just didn't know if maybe I could find out where that came from.
Clear on your question, Madam Clerk, on the salaries, all those increases were approved by the budget board. In fact, with the increase with respect to the police chief, that was heard multiple times.
And it's the other non-unions too though, right? It's not just the police chief that says 8%. It says it under sergeant, captain, and
Yeah, that's per the collective bargaining agreement, with the exception of the captain. The captain's not in the union. The other employees that are in that line, there are 5 of them total, including the captain. The other 4 are covered by the policeman's collective bargaining agreement.
And to be clear, in the contract, the sergeants, lieutenants, they are not getting 8% increases. They're following the 4% that was agreed to last budget, in the last contract.
Great point, Councilor Stan, you jogged my memory. Also in that line is holiday pay, which increases along with increases in salary. So longevity's I think that's a separate line, chief. I hear the chief saying longevity, I believe there's a separate line for longevity. But
That's why it
in
looks
that
like
particular,
8%.
correct.
Anybody else for public discussion? All right, if council is satisfied, public hearing can be declared closed. If not, the public hearing can continue to the next council meeting, 20th.
I wouldn't close it yet.
Okay.
I think we got discussion. I know the finance director has more to present, and there might be questions after that.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilor Steer. I had some, well, first I'd like to apologize to the council and the audience here. There's clearly an error in that adjusted 23 budget column. Something got changed. I need to figure out what happened and wrestle with that. I don't want to move forward without acknowledging that. So again, my apologies. I humble myself before the council and those watching for whatever that's worth. It's a manual process. It's an Excel document. That's how the town has been budgeting. The $32 million operation in Microsoft Excel. It works, but sometimes you're staring at something and you think they're the right numbers, and they're not. So again, not to beat a dead horse, I just don't want to overlook that. Again, my apologies. But with respect to changes in fiscal 24, that and Christine, there's no slide for this. So just thank you again for your help earlier. Was able to work with the chief of police. The intent and what's in the posted budget was to have a new recruit in the police department. But it turns out, just based on trying to execute that process, that's not likely. Therefore, the change that the council might consider is budgeting only for 7 months of a perhaps we get a lateral transfer from another department to come in. Additionally, there's changes to, and Mr. Steer mentioned this earlier, had some changes with respect to Gloucester schools. I think going up to full state aid, if that's something that the council wants to approve, that's something to consider. And additionally, the council approved $20,000 of American Rescue Plan funds for tires. I think that was at the last council meeting. That is still in the posted budget, so that's $20,000 that could come out. High level review there.
Okay, I mean, I've got a fair amount of changes that I'd like to propose to this, and I assume we can roll with this regardless of.
That'll be after public.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
if, I suppose, but are we gonna allow, it's still a public hearing, so we have some changes, but, want the public to comment about that too, I guess, right? So,
Keep it open.
so I'll start going down my little list, I suppose, if that's okay, Mr. President? Okay. So, get my notes here. So we'll start with the parade. It appears, it's my understanding they have $31,000 currently. And Adam, I'm gonna be picking your brain on this, but that's my understanding. $10,000 per year for the next 3 years has been allocated or obligated to them through the ARPA funds. It would be my proposal, and I don't know if we make a motion one at a time. My thoughts are we could, I would like to take that budget number that they have in that column from 20 and take it down to 10. That's my thought, and I think they have plenty of money to have a successful parade this year without any cutbacks. And again, knowing they're receiving, they have obligated $10,000 for the following 2 years as well. That came out of ARPA money. So I'd like to reduce that $20,000 to 10. That $20,000 funding from the operating to 10.
yeah, and that also includes the fireworks, so it's not just the parade itself. So
Right, sorry, and fireworks.
Actually, the whole budget that they have in there goes to the fireworks.
The fireworks is a major expense. So, I still believe that with their current balance, with what's been obligated from ARPA, we can reduce that number by 10, so. And if we're doing one motion at a time, I'll make a motion.
Well, these are all, I don't think we do a motion yet.
Okay.
I think they're just, these are your thoughts, maybe others have thoughts too, so.
So, I'll move on, to the next thought I had. Clearly, I'm a huge supporter of youth sports in town. Special relationship with the Little League for sure. They did receive a fair amount of ARPA money, and if, I'm sure everybody in this room's driven by, and it's been put to good use. That's also inspired others. It's my understanding that they're receiving a lot of private donations, because everyone sees the momentum. So for years they've been receiving, I will say, roughly $2,100, which was going specifically towards their insurance bills. Their ask of $7,200 was insurance plus the landscaping, some of their hard landscaping costs. Most towns, their public works department does the maintenance on that. In this scenario, well, the town doesn't own the fields they play on, so that's why they asked for more. That said, I think we can find a happy medium somewhere in there. I'll keep rolling, if that's okay.
Do you have a proposed number, Steve, on that?
I was thinking about having it,
Having it?
or 3,500. The next thought I had, obviously, there's the PBA request, which the director brought to light. I think, we've seen a lot of them. A couple of years ago, they received a generous donation because they were in a pickle with a misunderstanding. This past year, they've received a nice sum from ARPA funds. I don't think it's appropriate to, fund and help the GLL without helping the PBA. I know they're asking for 4. I wish they were here tonight so we could ask some questions regarding what the 4 would be going to, or 2 and 2, girls and boys. So, I wish they were here to answer questions, but my proposal would be to go 1 and 1 on that. And again, just out of, I know it's pennies, but I think I'd like to help them, but I think that would still be helpful given what they received from the ARPA, and I would support a $2,000 expenditure to the PBA. Gloucester Light Infantry, I believe the number we have recommended from the Budget Board. Actually, just to take a moment, I want to thank the Budget Board for them spending every Monday and Wednesday together, volunteering to present a really well done recommended budget, so thank you for that. Some Budget Board members in the room. So Gloucester Light Infantry, I believe I saw a $3,000 line item. I think a majority of that was to go to their parade costs or expenses.
Well, so that was one of my questions is, where did we come up with 3,000? Typically, our funding was my understanding when we funded them, a majority of that money was to go towards the running of the parade, the Memorial Day parade. However, they're not doing that anymore, so I don't know what was their rationale this year. I can't remember if those conversations happened before they notified us they weren't going to be doing the parade anymore, or after. So
and I don't remember the timeline, but I know a portion of that was for electricity, I believe.
Yeah.
Is that
And insurance.
electricity and insurance? So I don't know what that number is, and certainly if that's, you know, I don't know what part of that $3,000 request that looks like.
It was a third, those thirds, but each third increasing to the $3,000 request. And I think in terms of the timing,
So electricity and their insurance was roughly 2,000.
I'd have to check the book for that breakdown. They provided us with their financials from last year. I don't have that off the top of my head.
I
but-
believe that was ballpark, like you said, about a third
Yeah.
of each. Because I think the parade was about $1,000 ballpark.
So to keep going here, it's interesting. I was recently the lifeguard pay, something that I think we should look really hard at. We know what kind of hiring climate there is. It's an incredibly critical position naturally for a summer program, and I know how many young families that serves. And I would be very open to raising it to a competitor. I know, frankly, there isn't a municipality around us that's offering less than what the $18 an hour here that our rec director has asked for. I think everybody knows where I stand with the litter in this town, and there's been incredible efforts by everyone working on that. I for $936 on a line item, I would support 6 hours per week for 6 weeks for 2 people. So something I'd be very open to considering. I guess to stay in that same lane, the snack shed request at GMP. It's my thought there. I believe, you know, naturally the building is falling down and it stands out like a sore thumb over there. I'd be open to fixing that up because certainly it's not there. But the snack shed at GMP to me presents a little bit more of a, you know, there's more to it sounds great, and then until you have two teams handling cash every day, and I know from my experience as a volunteer, different youth sports organizations, there's food licensing and all that, so that's where I am on that. What else? We have probably some more.
You mentioned cemeteries, Steve.
Oh.
I can touch on that, but if you wanted to.
Go for it.
So the cemeteries, as Council Arno mentioned, that was on my list too, and they do a fantastic job. And, you know, Madam Clerk mentioned something too about, you know, before this was all volunteer, a few years ago, they asked for some money to do specific work on some sites, and again, they've done an amazing job. However, I've looked and I can't find any other municipalities who are funding cemetery cleanup, if you will. So I think what we've done over the years is fantastic to be able to support some really dedicated individuals who have done this work for an important cause. However, 15,000, that's what usually happens when you start having volunteers working on things like this, and it grows, right? Not because, hey, I want to create something for myself, but there's things that can be done. But as we've heard tonight, we've got a lot of budget concerns, and you know, before all this discussion. So at a minimum, I would say we'd be cutting at least $9,000 to $10,000 off of that. I don't mind funding some of that, but we also, to the point is, we need to find out how is this being spent. I think the majority of it is they have contractors come in and do some heavy work because many of the volunteers are not young and spry, right? They're giving up their time, but they're So, that's, I think that's where that goes, but, they've done a lot of work over the last 3 or 4 years, where now a lot of it is, they're still coming up with more cemeteries, but, more of it's maintenance now, so, and again, we're talking about small numbers here, right? There's bigger numbers we're gonna get to, I'm gonna get to a little bit later too, that maybe to find ways to work this budget better, but, those are just some things that came up in my mind as well. All that you brought up and that as well.
If I could just hop in on the cemeteries, one of the things, and can't thank Mr. Brown enough for all the work and his volunteers. He's been allocated, if memory serves, Adam, he's been allocated 12K of ARPA funds, correct?
In the current year, yes.
In the current year, okay, or been, 12K has been obligated. It's my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, if that hasn't been utilized yet, correct?
Has not. No, sir.
So that's another,
So to me, I think, structurally, I would say, the previous years, we've been in the neighborhood of $6,000, okay? And if that line stays at $6,000, then that's probably the baseline next year. If that line goes to $15,000, it's likely where we start. So perhaps he can get all he's looking for in the following year by simply, not touching the obligated ARPA funds to him currently, and he's still got, his expenses or their expenses typically are one-time cleanups, and then it's volunteers who, one-time cleanups that are too big for volunteers, and then volunteers take it from there, and so that is a thought to serve all right there, and might be.
well, I wasn't totally aware, remember the ARPA, but I didn't realize it hadn't been spent yet. So, maybe that 6,000's too high too right now, if they haven't used it.
They have spent the 6. They haven't spent any of the ARPA, just to be clear.
Okay, and it was 12,000, Adam?
Yep.
Okay, so
Maybe that's something we have to think about as well, especially where we are right now. So again, those are kind of small numbers here, if we went through that, we're probably saving $20,000-ish, right? Ballpark figure. But the big thing is, and Mr. Steer I'm sorry, Steve, I'm taking, what else did you have?
no, keep going.
Okay. It goes back to Mr. Steer's talk about using fund balance to fund operations, which is never a good idea in my opinion. So, but I think there's a way that we could not do that. And I don't know, Adam, I think you and I had discussed a couple of things, and if you had more thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think this,
There's a possibility for the council to use more of the set-asides for, instead of 100,000 for the proration, use 200,000 and then request that we refund that amount from the unrestricted fund balance. And same on the Gloucester school side, use a bit more of the set-aside, and then ask the Gloucester residents to refund those accounts. To manage that maintenance of efforts, but specifically on the Gloucester School District side.
So basically, there's a way not to use fund balance from the unrestricted, restricted fund balance in operations.
Correct. In addition to the savings that, I think what you've just discussed there, those, the 20,000 for the tires, and the big one, or the largest of those, is the changes in the police department I described earlier.
Yep.
Between the pay and benefits there.
Because I, for one, am not for using, as I just mentioned, fund balance for that. But the other thing is, if we're able to remove that that means that if that were to go that way, Adam, what would our fund balance be at, about 19-ish?
Down to 18%. I know Mr. Steer had different calculations earlier. I'd like to meet with him and perhaps, and just check my figures, but I'm confident in that calculation.
So if that's the case, what that will allow us to do is in capital, 19 is a big number. I think 12 is too low. Personally, the way the world is, 12% was thought of a long time ago. I can't remember the year. I wasn't on the council when that happened. So it's at least 15 years ago. But things cost more. So I think 15 is a reasonable place to be. That would allow us to do some capital projects, like add to paving, for example, to make sure that if we don't keep up on that, we're going to be looking at a bond issue for our roads, right? That's really what's going to happen. So if we can keep up on that, maybe that mitigates that issue. Maybe some of the smaller requests, I know security cameras came up. We do have problems. We have problems at GMP. We have a wonderful program. We have a wonderful place now. And it's amazing. It's like you get something nice and you can't have anything nice nowadays, right? Because people, I don't know what it is, whether they just don't care, whatever, or it's somebody else, but we've had some issues over there, and it's unfortunate, but I think those would be resolved. But in the meantime, there's opportunities here to get us where we want to be. Also, with the going back to the fund balance, be able to fund some of the smaller things that have been requested as well, and still put us in a place where we're going to be able to do the right thing for the town and the taxpayer, which is the biggest thing. But we also have to find out what our real numbers are. So maybe they are correct, but if they're not, we just want to make sure, right? So we have the right numbers to work off of. Going back to recreation, Bob has some good requests there. One is the lifeguards. It's hard to keep people nowadays. People are going for money. I don't blame them, right? So if we have some good people and we want to keep them, I think we do need to bump the pay for that. As far as the litter crew, to Councilman Arnold's point, the $936, I think that's a good investment in the big scheme of a whole budget like this. The snack, I don't think we're there for the snack shack. There's so much that goes into that. So me personally, I don't think we're ready for that. Maybe down the line a year or two, but this year, not it. And the bigger picture is that we have to be really responsible, because we all know things cost more. It's tougher for us, but we're probably in a recession already. If nobody wants to admit it, we probably are. Things are going to get worse. And we want to make sure that we're being as responsible as possible with this budget, not creating structural deficits and not spending more than we need to spend. But at the same time, funding what needs to be funded, because things do cost more. So we have to find that line. And I go back to the work of the budget board, their tireless work. There's a lot of time that goes into that. So I want to thank them for their efforts. And I thank everybody for their comments today, too, because that's really important, because sometimes people see things that everybody else doesn't. So those comments obviously are important, because we want to get this budget right, because when we bring it to the voters, this is one that is responsible for the town, funds everything that needs to be done, but it's also, bottom line, responsible to our pocketbooks, right? Because we're all taxpayers in town, me included. So, but those are the thoughts I have. I know Adam's going to work on getting us those real numbers as far as changes that have been suggested tonight, and leave it to other council people as well. I might have some other thoughts, but I don't want to take up everybody's time.
One thing that I didn't, again, going back to the recreation department, at $5,000 materials and equipment, for 2 years worth of stuff, you know, that's a lot of programming, and I would consider looking at that, or some portion of that. Ski trip is a really cool thing for a whole lot of kids in town. Really on the, it's, and for many kids in town, it's their one time to go skiing any year. I know they pulled off a beautiful trip this past year. Bob, with a head shake, that was about 60 children who were able to enjoy that more.
Yeah, so this particular year, we were only able to do the 2 buses, but they actually cut off the registration when they hit that max, and I'm pretty certain that they hit their registration max like the second day that they had opened it up. So I'm willing to bet that if they were able to go ahead and offer a 3rd bus, they'd probably fill it as well. So it's definitely something that's worthwhile. It's a good investment, and it's something that unfortunately the school committee used to go ahead and be able to do under their umbrella, because field trips you could just pay for them and that was fine, but new legislation doesn't require you to do that. So yeah, it's definitely a big, absolute positive one that you're mentioning here.
So Bob, I don't wanna get in the weeds on all this stuff.
I hear you.
Is that just like transportation, does that include renting, everything, lessons, things like that? So these are already established skiers, the most likely that are going, right?
No, so it's definitely a mixed bag. And the biggest thing that we're able to do by providing a portion of funds to this trip is to go ahead and keep that ticket price basically under $100. And that's kind of the mandate. I shouldn't say a mandate, but it's the idea that we want to try and make it as affordable as possible for those kids that do have to do the rentals. So I would probably say, just kind of eyeballing the list this past year, it's got to be somewhere around like a 60-40 split, where like 40% of those skiers are either first timers or inexperienced, or someone that's, you know, just trying to get into the sport. So it's not like we're just funding a fun weekend.
It's $3,000, and we have bigger fish to fry, for lack of a better term, in our budget right now. And if we can fix those, maybe that 3 is not such a big deal, but I just think of it that way. And the paddleboard thing, again, it's $1,500, but I'm not concerned about the water, okay? I'm not concerned. What I am, it's adding additional programs right now when things are tight, that's all. And again, it's not a big expense, but.
And I think that ultimately, and I'll stop yammering in a second here, I think the biggest problem I ultimately have is that it just appeared as though my particular budget suffered a significant decrease in operating expenses, where if you were to take $9,500 away from another department, it's not going to be as nearly as detrimental to their programs as it is to someone that's operating on potentially, you know, $30,000 worth of operation. I think the next group that's closest to me is probably the senior center, and if you look at their expenses and their operating costs, it dwarfs, if not doubles mine. So I think that that's the only concern I have, and the reason why I raise these kind of issues right now. I totally understand that if we were to get rid of recreation tomorrow, the town's still going to operate and have those things that are vital to us. But I definitely feel as though we provide that element of community and offer, you know, that leisure that, you know, all good towns are going to be able to provide to their citizens.
Thank you.
I got one more for you. Sorry.
It's okay.
You mentioned that you spend $5,000 in materials and equipment, but that covers 2 years.
So that covers 2 years just for the arts and crafts. So we do have other things that are going to come out of that line item. We have our tree lighting ceremony, which we run on a daily basis. We have the big truck event that we do every spring. There's numerous different events that we offer throughout the whole scope of the year that draw from that particular line item. So if we were to cut it in half, some things are going to have to go, unfortunately.
How much, if we bought 1 year of art,
Exactly.
of arts and crafts without, and the tree lighting, I know all the events you do, and it's
Exactly.
special for the community. Is that $1,000 savings? Is that, there's,
Honestly, whatever I can get close to what I've requested, I'm obviously gonna try and do my best to make everything work. It just makes my job just a little bit more difficult to be able to pinch a penny here or there when, spreading out kind of the deductions over the whole budget just appears to be more appropriate in my perspective, but.
Would you be able to, you think, get more of a discount buying quantity rather than, so if you
That's-
bought 2 years' worth?
So that's exactly what
You
we
would get a
actually do.
discount.
So if you were, hypothetically, you buy crayons. If you buy it in bulk, it's gonna be a cheaper savings than if you're just buying for one particular year. That's why I get onto this every 2-year cycle, so that way we are purchasing at a discounted rate.
I'm completely in favor of the $5,000 for recreation. I know my grandchildren and my sons now are adults, but, it's been a fantastic program, and it's a great way to bring families together and get people in the community to know one another. So I'm definitely in favor of that.
Thanks, Barb.
Thank you all, appreciate it.
Any other council discussion?
well, I mean, some of it is the big picture mechanics. Again, going back to, exactly, such as taking that number from unrestricted fund balance to fund operations, and that was, which was posted on the website. And we'll end that down to as little or nothing as possible. And I think there is a way, again, to parrot Walt here, if we use the set-asides, restricted set-asides for both proration and Gloucester, and then reload them with our unrestricted fund balance,
Well, so the point came up too about the proration. First of all, the voters decided not to add more money to that a couple of times in the last few years, which is unfortunate. They didn't understand the reason why. But now we're here with that bill because the proration every year for the region depends on the amount of students in the district. The last 3 years, Gloucester's really gotten hammered, for lack of a better term, paying that. Gloucester, we knew it was coming, and sooner or later it was gonna happen, and this year it did. Fortunately enough, we were able to, I think it was about 216,000, Adam?
215.
215. So, in this proposed budget, it says use 100,000, I think it was mentioned we should be using 200,000, and that reduces some of that. And, when you take that 578, I think that's the number, whatever it is, out of operations for fund balance, either we can, I don't know if this is the year to put it in the budget, it's not a bad idea. However, we can ask the voters to reload that with a certain amount. We'll see where we end up with the fund balance. And whatever comes of this budget, we need to make sure as a council that we're communicating this to our residents, so when they do need to vote, they understand what they're voting on, especially the proration. That's an important one, and of course, the whole budget. So I think there's another 100,000 that we can use from that restricted account. We talked about the parade committee. They have 31,000 plus 10,000, and with some savings there as well. There's not a lot of big areas. I mean, to this point, it's not a fat budget. So there's a lot of little places. The chief was gracious to work with us about a possible new recruit instead of a whole year, 6 or 7 months, because like everything else right now, it's just really difficult to find good people to fill those positions. So, I mean, we got some work to do here. Lean on Adam here to really guide us through this, with these numbers to get us to where we need to be. But I was just doing a really rough draft here, but I think just in some of the discussion we had tonight, we found $100,000 in savings, if you will, here, but I'm sure there's more. But my biggest thing really is not using fund balance and I know this happened one year, and you know what, I'll take credit for that because I missed it. Because I never would have voted for that budget when that happened, because it's just not a sound way to create a municipal budget, because it's a structural deficit, and every year it just gets bigger. It does, it happens, and especially when you have new people here, you'll have 5 different people here someday, they don't understand, oh, this is just the way to go, this is what they do, and we have to be careful of that. So, but I think there's a way out of that. I think Adam has a way out of that for us, so looking forward to moving forward with that.
Good.
So next steps, right?
I got a hand up in the
Oh,
back.
okay, go ahead.
Come on up, Dave.
Thank you.
I wasn't gonna talk about operating expenses, but it looks like you're looking for nickels and dimes, so I got a couple of places if you wanna look, and whether you take the suggestions or not. Go to page 10. Economic development. We're budgeting $5,000 a year. Fiscal year 21, they used $1,855. Last year they used $1,095. And they need $5,000.
I thought they used all their funding last year for the website
Those figures come from the audit, so. Just throwing it out there. Page 23. Your storm account, you're putting 100,000 in there. As of 6/30/22, you had 271,000 sitting in an account, an assigned account. So you could basically say, okay, you're gonna fund it 100,000, but let's take 50,000 out of that account and use that as an adjustment. So you're actually using some of your assigned account to bring down your expenses. And that would show on page 4 as an adjustment. And I don't know, you budgeted 80,000 this year, you had a good year, so I don't know how much of that 80,000 you used. But that's something you can think about. And that's a little bit bigger than the nickels and dimes. Page 29. Senior Center. If you go down towards the bottom of the page, it says programs and activities, and it's budgeted at 10,000. It's never been used. I'm not sure what it's for, but I couldn't find any audit where it was used. So if you want to figure out what it's for, why they haven't used it, maybe you can reduce it or cut it.
Yeah, I think one of the, and because that was a question we addressed directly, I think one of it was restoring programming that didn't exist during COVID time. I believe that was, if memory serves, but.
My point is, it's never been used.
Yeah.
Also, on the very last item there, mechanical appliances, repair, replace, got 2,000. And just to give you a little history on that, that was established, Melissa, when I was on the budget board, Melissa came in and said, well, you know, a new commercial stove or whatever they got up there is not your $800 or $900, it's thousands of dollars. So what we said was, okay, do you want to put 2,000 in the budget? We said, fine, put 2,000 in. If you don't use it, put it into an assigned account and keep doing that. Well, that never happened. All it did was roll to the bottom line. Nobody ever put it in an assigned account, and nobody ever uses that. So now if she has a $3,000 whatever appliance, she needs to take it out of the regular budget instead of going and grabbing that money from the assigned account.
That's why I asked about the $70,000?
Yeah.
I think somebody said it was for programs one time. I
Just-
don't know what it's for.
Just throwing it out there. Page 31. Other operational. If you go down to the very last item, transfer to healthcare reserve, 5,000. You've got in the audit, at least as of 6/30/22, you had 392,000 in that account. And I went back a few years in the audit, I couldn't see where you ever used any money out of it. So there's 5,000, whether you wanna zero that account out or leave something in there just so you can have that account there, whatever, but there is a savings there. And the last one I had was, you're gonna think we're hammering those poor cemetery folks, but, the audit does have a restricted account with cemetery with perpetual care, which I guess you could say cleaning up the historic cemeteries is a perpetual care. And I think there's like $9,900, $10,000 in that account. That was established back in 2010, if I remember right. Never been touched. So you might wanna do a little research on that and see. I know it's a restricted account, so it means it has to be for perpetual care. How it ever got established, I have no idea. I can't believe the town established an account for perpetual care.
I think it's through probate. No, what it is there's individual cemeteries that are named, and you know, it's owned, it's like the steer plot, okay? And the only people that can use that is the people that are associated with that particular cemetery, and a lot of them don't use it, but at times they have come in and said, you know, we wanna do this, or fix this stone, or do that. I don't think it's it's not to do with historical cemeteries. It's money that the town's holding for those family-owned plots that are out there. And they've been out there for thousands of years.
I guess my question is, and nobody here's gonna be able to answer, why would we ever accept that money as a town? And boy, they must have been in great shape, because not a dollar's been used out of that account.
There has been times, I'm talking when I was there, that, you know, certain families have come in and said, okay, I need $200, we wanna do this. For whatever reason, it was given to the town to care for.
Are you saying that was a donation, Jackie, or is that
No,
something that was budgeted?
No budget. It's just money that's been sitting in a balance sheet that was
Right.
for individual family plots.
So, but that was taxpayer money that was put in that account, it wasn't somebody said, hey, I have money, can we put it in a
No.
restricted account?
No, not if we're talking about the same thing, no.
That restricted account, how did the money get there, I guess that's the question,
I don't know.
okay.
Yeah, I have no idea. It's been sitting there, like I said, I think since 2010. The dollar amount has not changed significantly, so whether you can or you can't use it, I don't know.
And I think, going back to the senior center donations, what used to always go in there was dues. Unless that's a different account here, that's what I'm looking for, because it could be a different account. But if it was, that's what it was for, to pay for activities. And then there was also a Senate grant that paid for the activities. And then they always budgeted in the budget, you know, because again, at the time, they were spending like $26,000 on activities. I'm sure it's more now. But, again, remember, they haven't been doing activities for a couple of years because it was COVID.
Right.
So they weren't doing any.
Thank you, David.
Come on up.
Walter Steer. Yeah, as far as that proration money, if we got 216,000 in there put away, I say use the whole thing. Because we're asking for another 220,000 for next year too. You could even use part of that if you wanted. I'm just hoping when we get this factory mutual thing straightened out, that the town will be after this budget, the town will get back to normal, kinda, and, I hope.
So do I think all of us.
I would just use as much of that set aside money that we have to try to lower the impact to the taxpayers. I guess you may not wanna use it all, because following year, we don't know what's gonna happen, but, I don't know how that works, if that's set aside money, so would that be available the following year to use in the budget? It would. So you have to be a little careful on that too, I suppose. I don't know. I'd like to see, everybody's talking about the revals, so, everybody's property values are way up, so a $1 increase now is a lot more than it was. It's probably 50%, again, what it would cost you. So, if your valuation was $250, now it's $400. Every dollar the rate goes up instead of $250, $400. That's a lot of money. I know mine's going up $300 if we go by the value, by the tax rate we have in this paper, $12.93. So I hope it doesn't go any higher than that. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I was wrong. So there is a GASB 54, that's your dues. And that's,
Okay.
people pay the dues and it goes in, it gets assigned. That's how you get GASB 54. It's by you, the council, only the council can do assignments of fund balance. So it didn't fall into the fund balance. Any dues that they paid was assigned to pay for, in the past, was to pay for programs. The donations, again, were just, this is in a restricted fund, in this audit. It's in a restricted revenue fund. So those donations, I don't know why it's called donations. That should be looked at, because if it's in a restricted fund, usually the only things that can be restricted are like grants, federal money, state money, because it's for a specific purpose. So off the top of my head, I don't know why, but it did have a fund balance in 2021. I'd have to go back and look at other audits. But if it's in a restricted fund, that means it's for a specific purpose.
No, that's all I have.
Anybody else over here?
Well, I think I've got one more, and it's not something I really care to discuss, but I'm going to, is non-union salary increases and the percentages. So unfortunately, that involves the chief and I believe the captain. It's been an 8% request. It's my understanding the line 3. So I think that's just something we need to be comfortable with. I understand that every director has a very different role, but there is some, you could look at this as a readjustment as opposed to a raise based on market values, but it's just something I think the council should just be comfortable with moving forward. I think that's the last thing I have outside of anything, again, structural, with the big numbers.
Adam, if you could just clarify that, is that like whole package 8%, or is that salary only percent?
With respect to the chief,
Yes.
that is basically half of the original amount, which broke down into thirds which was an amount for longevity, an amount for holiday pay, and an amount for cost of living increase. And the budget board, trying to, I think, search for some path forward. I don't want to speak for them, but being present for those discussions, cut it in half.
And the same goes for the captain as well.
Yes.
Or,
The captain mirrors the IBPO contracts, which is longevity, holiday pay, medical buyback, everything that goes with that. I don't, I'm out of that. I'm totally out of that. And just an FYI, there is 8 or 9 police officers that make more than I do. So, because I don't get the longevity holiday pay, and that's kind of the impetus of this. It's now, hey, I'm trying to outdo any other department head or anything like that. It's just the impetus of that, the principle of that happening. And then the market, as you said, the market comparables. I'm the most underpaid police chief probably in Northern Rhode Island. I'm in my 14th year in the town. So it's just, and that's only a principle thing. And I respect ultimately the budget board's analysis in their decision on how they did that. They could have said no, and I would live with that. I'm a happy department head. I'm grateful for the town it's done for me, and I try to pay that back tenfold. So I'm very happy with that. So I respect their analysis, and I respect them for what they did and how they presented it. So does that make sense? If any questions on that, I'd be glad to answer it.
I don't have any, other than grateful for your service and all you do for this town.
Thank you.
Is that also, sorry, just gears are spinning. So for the captain, lieutenant, and sergeant, that 8%, is it the same mindset with them too, as far as where they are with other town agencies?
I think the captain's, he mirrors the contract.
Right.
That we just negotiated. I think he's still underpaid, comparing with other, he's really the deputy chief. He's in his 30th year, and he's an excellent deputy chief, an excellent captain. Everybody knows it, everybody knows him well. You know him firsthand of his abilities, and I think we saw that 100-fold during the COVID response with him working with Jerry, and I tasked him with that, and he was second. You know, he had the best operation morale, and that, a lot of that's him and the EMA director. So
right.
It's a combination of a lot of things. So, but his base is underpaid.
And the other two are union.
That's all you're
already,
right.
that's.
Right, he mirrors the exact contract,
Okay.
and that's always been the way it's been. So.
Okay,
And I don't. Thank you.
thank you. Well, I guess we're at the point now, do you want to close the public hearing now?
I think we need to keep it open because we have more, Adam's gonna rework some stuff and he's gonna have it for Thursday night, right? Because that's,
I did put it on the agenda for Thursday night, just in case
yeah,
you wanted to come back.
because you're not gonna be able to come up with numbers right now, which is probably not the
No,
best way
I
to
wouldn't
do it
even
anyway. I wouldn't
get-
even want you to.
Yeah, I'd like to get,
Just want to verify that 23 column, obviously.
yeah, that's the starting point, because everything else moves off of that, so. Yeah, I need to start there and bring that back to the council, and I've obviously been taking notes. So I know no motions have been made yet, but I can factor some of those things that were discussed into a new model for you Thursday night.
Sure.
Any of the changes, Councilor Arnold, any motions on that, or have Adam? put
I
the
think
numbers
Adam's
through?
working at the, I don't disagree with anything that was mentioned tonight as far as
Yeah.
proposed
I agree.
cuts.
So
Take those numbers
Thursday
that
night.
Councilor Arnold mentioned, and let's plug them in and see where we're at.
So I got a question. So going back to what Dave Steer said, which, so how we, if the levy's wrong with the state and it's not the levy that was adopted, how do we fix that? Do you know? No. And how, that's, so I'm assuming that the tax rate was factored on the correct levy. Yeah.
Well, that's one of the things we'll find out then.
I'll have to replug all the numbers in and
Yeah, but that tax rate is what we almost done paying.
I don't have an answer for you.
Might be a solicitor question.
Yeah.
I think it is a solicitor question.
Anything else? Alright, so we know we need to work on. Maybe we get David involved with that last question as well. Help Adam out with that.
Yeah, we just need to verify a couple of things, and if there is in fact an error, how do we handle it moving forward? To Jackie's point, I don't
Yeah.
have no idea, but.
you can communicate to Mr. Igliozzi tomorrow.
Sure.
At least start moving in the right direction and make sure that we're in the right direction or whatever we have to do to fix.
May I ask a question, just for clarification?
Sure.
So one of the things that Adam's gonna look at is the audit and the unrestricted or the different funds that might be used for some of the things in the budget. Is he gonna go through those and make sure that we could possibly use those and maybe the reasons that they're available to be used? So we have a clear idea of what can and can't be used from them?
Sounds like that's what was on Adam's list
Right,
there.
Yeah.
he is gonna do that, right? You
Yes.
aren't, okay.
have
I
those
thought
notes.
that's what you, based
No.
on what Jeannie said, sorry.
Thank you for clarifying.
If we found that we used the wrong number, could we use the fund balance to fix that for the taxpayers
So,
in the upcoming budget?
would be an
Would
option.
that be a fix, in your opinion, David?
Any other questions?
Would,
That-
if we found we had the wrong numbers and we possibly taxpayers overpaid, could we adjust that with using money from the fund balance to bring this budget down?
My opinion on this current year balance is, I'm assuming the taxes were based on incorrect levy. That levy went to the state, so it's on the state website, so I think your taxes are probably lower than what the budget was that was approved.
Yay.
Yeah, it might not be a bad thing, but it's not the correct thing.
Okay.
And town council can do whatever they want with unrestricted funds.
Right.
Thank you.
I don't have anything else.
All right.
I don't have anything right now.
So does that leave us to our last motion?
Do we need to
We
Do
probably
anything with
should
the-
make a motion to continue
Continue.
to.
Continue?
I'll make a for
20th.
Thursday, right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
20th. So I'll make a motion, continue the public hearing for the budget to the meeting of April 20th.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And the last motion, please.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Can I get a second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you all for coming.
I'm gonna give you that, salary compensation thing that council adopted.
I'm gonna have to like go home now.